Thank you. Before we begin the meeting, I'd just like us to all take part in a quiet moment of reflection to think about the seriousness of the decisions we've got to make today, and also pay our respects and remember the families caught up in the tragedies at both London and Manchester and the effect it's had on all of their families. We can just take a few moments of silence. Thank you. Okay, item 1 on the agenda, apologies for absence. We've received apologies from Councillors Findlay, Thrower, Walsh, Carroll and Graham Jeffrey. Are there any other apologies for absence?
Which we will make sure is submitted.
Councillors Moses, Harding and Jones, by the looks of it.
Okay, are there any declarations of interest? There will be a green form going round if anybody wants to write them down. Item 3 is to confirm the accuracy of the minutes of the previous meeting held on the 11th of May 2017.
Please.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder? Thank you. Announcements from the Mayor. There'll be a couple of important events coming up which I'd like to bring to your attention. To mark the 100th year of Dormanstown, there'll be a 2-day celebration which will take place tomorrow and on Saturday at the Green in Dormanstown. I'd also like to remind everybody that it's Armed Forces Day on Saturday, and there'll be a service of remembrance and celebration on Redcar High Street from 10:20 onwards, and events throughout the day to remember our armed forces and veterans. I hope many of us will be able to support that. Are there any announcements from the leader?
Madam Mayor, a few things I'd just like to talk about. First of all, I think most of us will remember that 2 weeks ago today we were all involved in a general election, and I just wanted to make a couple of comments on that. First of all, I wanted to put on record our thanks to retiring MP Tom Blenkinsop. Tom, as many of you will know, served as the MP for Middlesbrough South and East Cleveland from 2010, and he was a great advocate for our area, a great constituency MP, and he worked for and saved many jobs both in Bolby and obviously with his work to help us save the steelworks, and I'm sure everybody in this chamber would want to wish him every success in the future. Secondly, I just want to pass on congratulations to our successful candidates, Anna Turley and Simon Clark. I obviously look forward to working with both of those, as I'm sure all of you do. And I also want to put on record our thanks to or for the contribution of all the other candidates for the part they played in the election campaign, and particularly in that respect our own Councillor Mason. So thank you all to those. Finally, I just want to say a huge thank you to Amanda and to all her staff, particularly Sue Bridges, who all of us know, who've just successfully completed what I think must be the set of elections over the last 12 months. So they've done the referendum, council by-elections, the mayoral election and the general election. And I think that's no mean feat. And I think as politicians, we need to do them a favour and not have any more elections for a while if we can avoid it. So a big thanks to all of them. So that's my thanks on that one. In terms of the normal steel statistics that I give you, they will be circulated to members at the end of June, the latest statistics from the task force. Just a couple of other things I want to reference. First is that big banner over there, the Love Your Neighbour banner, and many of you will remember that I raised the whole Love Your Neighbour campaign last February in the first instance. And I'm really pleased to say that on Tuesday, and the Mayor was there, we had a brilliant launch of that event. It was really, really good. And for anybody who doesn't know, that campaign was about demonstrating the unity of our communities and the many acts of neighbourliness that happen on a daily basis and go unseen and unreported. And in Redcar, the campaign has been led by Together Middlesbrough and Cleveland, which is a project run by the Diocese of York and supported by the Church Urban Fund, and indeed many other charities and organisations. And the event on Tuesday, we heard from community groups and activities from right across the borough, every single corner, and it was brilliant to hear from them. And, you know, I think the Mayor's already made the point about the tragic events in Manchester and London, and I think never has there been a time when we need to be standing together and working together and showing the resilience of our communities to ensure that we make the most of that and support everybody that we can, as has been seen in those tragic incidents. The campaign itself, as you can see, the banner has got a number of signatures on it, and I think there's some big felt pens sitting on the side there. So if people would like to, before they leave the council chamber today, if they'd like to sign the pledge, to do something kind, it says, but really it's just about working on your community. It'd be great to have your signatures added to the ones that are there. Finally, just very quickly, just referring you to this little booklet that's in front of you, you'll recall that last year we all signed up to become part of the Tees Valley City of Sanctuary, which is particularly promoted by Justice First, who are a charity who look after the interests of asylum seekers and refugees. They provided a little booklet like this last year, and this is the latest updated version, and it sets out some key facts about refugees and asylum seekers, both in the Tees Valley and beyond, and there's one for each of us, so I hope you find that useful reading. Thank you very much, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Are there any announcements from Cabinet members? No. And any announcements from the Chief Executive?
No announcements today. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Item agenda 6, to consider questions from the public for which notice has been given. No questions from members of the public have been received. Item 7, we're going to consider and agree any reports from Cabinet and Council committees. First of which is Looked After Children and Child Sexual Exploitation by Councillor Hannaway.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Obviously, some of the things I'll be discussing in the Looked After Children's report will also appear in the annual report, so I won't do them twice. I'll just keep this first report as brief as possible. So on the subject of numbers, the numbers remain in the 240s as they were last time, which historically is a very high number. So I simply have to say what I always say, which is that this continues to represent a big demand in terms of budget pressures, and also appears to represent the situation in the community that the level of neglect is increasing. We continue to apply our thresholds consistently and to look after these children. On the subject of foster care training, the recent Skills to Foster training, we had some feedback on that, as you see in 2.3, from our foster carers, including one which says, training has assured me that there is plenty of support available to my family when fostering. And I think this is one of the advantages of being an in-house foster carer, is the support that we give to them. On 2.4, you'll see we have an implementation plan that's been put in place for our new strategy of recruitment for in-house foster carers, which is going very well so far. We are recruiting a lot more foster carers now, but of course the demand is going up at the same time. And so as part of that implementation plan, we're offering retention payments. We have new scales of allowances for them, and the headline measure is that we're also paying council tax for fostering households up to Band B. Turning the page, looking at foster carer training. Our foster carers and social workers attended training on managing allegations, because they do happen, and of course they can have a very catastrophic effect on that foster carer continuing where the allegation is unfounded. So helping them to handle those very serious situations is very important. In terms of foster carer support, we're seeing the numbers growing at the foster carer support groups, where they can meet each other and discuss their concerns. We've also continued to publicise our fostering work. One of the team went on Zetland FM and was interviewed. And we've also, thank you to Councillor Norton for pointing out that some of our banners are looking a bit tatty around the place, so we've got to replace those. There's an interesting piece of work there in 212, where one of our looked after children, a young offender, completed his offending order and then took part in a project with Durham University called It's My Life. And I think this is a really good example of the kind of things that we need to do with young offenders. And I think that way of putting together people's real life issues and academic research is very promising for the way we work in the future. Going down to the bottom, to the permanency team, we currently have 8 couples that are completing assessments for adoption. And over the page, there are 9 children whose plan is adoption at the moment, who we are seeking families for. That goes on to the work of the Leaving Care Service. The personal advisors in the care service recently attended a conference where the guest note speaker was Lem Sissay, the poet, broadcaster, who was also a foster child himself. They had a lot of interesting experiences to tell them. The Foundation for Jobs programme is continuing the Teenagers to Work programme alongside the Leaving Care Service, and I'm going to be meeting the chair of Foundation for Jobs, Graham Henderson, to discuss the work of the programme so far. Moving on to child sexual exploitation, we've been recently discussing the sharing of data and the analysis of data with the police on CSE issues. I find that sharing data issues is one of the really big issues in all sorts of areas concerning looking after and helping vulnerable children. And the extent to which data can be shared successfully, it's extremely serious. Lives can hang in the balance of data being shared properly at the right time. That's a very important piece of work. And then over the page, a child protection safeguarding officer has been delivering training sessions on CSE at TTE recently. And also, the policy on taxi licenses now includes a session, an awareness test on CSE, and 225 taxi drivers have completed that awareness test so far. I'd just like to add that recently I had a meeting with MAPA, which I think stands for Multi-Agency Public Protection Agreement. And that followed a councillor coming to me with a concern about CSE, about the monitoring of sex offenders. And so that led to me having a meeting with MAPA, which was extremely instructive on the kind of work they do. And I left the meeting, I suppose, partly reassured in the sense that they clearly have extremely good teams doing this very important, very serious work, and somewhat awed by the amount of work they have to do in terms of the amount of monitoring they have to complete, but less reassured on the issue of funding, because they made it very plain to me, and this of course happens in so many areas at the moment, that their funding is very stretched and the caseloads of the officers concerned is increasing. And I think with that in mind, I think it has to be said that it really, really is time for the government, the new government, if it is a government, to look at what has happened with police budgets and to seriously consider increasing the amount of money that they give the police. Because there is no work that could be more serious than this work, and they are very stretched, and they wanted to share that with me. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder for the report? Thank you. And any questions? No questions. Thank you very much. Would you like to sum up? Councillor Hannaway?
Me again. Right. Thank you. Okay. So this is the annual report of
Oh,
Children's
no,
Services.
sorry. It was just to see if you wanted to sum up on...
Oh,
because
sorry,
you
I
had
thought we
no
were moving on.
questions. No. we've
Sorry,
got
Madam Mayor.
Councillor Messi, is there anything to add?
No.
No,
Thank you.
Okay, we'll move on to items... Oh, sorry, all those in favour of agreeing the report? On to item 7B, which is the report from Cabinet on the proposals for updating scrutiny arrangements by Councillor Massey.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This one has done the rounds somewhat, but as the proposals include a constitutional change, it's before us today because it requires the assent of full council. Very briefly, these proposals seek to bring our scrutiny arrangements in line with the new directorate structure, which the Cabinet and the Council therefore agreed in March this year. As this report requires cabinet approval and has got cabinet approval, it also needs to consult with the Governance Committee and with Executive Scrutiny. We have been at Governance and Executive Scrutiny with this report. The Governance Committee, as you can see from the printout that you've been handed out, noted the report, and Executive Scrutiny supported the report, which was welcomed. So very simply, what is being proposed? Currently we have 4 scrutiny committees of the Council, and it's not proposed that we have any less. It's continued to be 4 scrutiny committees, but they're going to be aligned slightly differently in these proposals. So People's Services Scrutiny and Improvement Committee, that will be split because the directorates have been split into Adults and Communities Scrutiny, which includes the neighbourhoods function, and Children and Families Scrutiny. These 2 scrutinies will continue to meet on a Tuesday because we understand that members have diary commitments who might want to be on the same committees again. So Children and Families will meet at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday and Adults at 2 o'clock on a Tuesday. The Resources Scrutiny and Improvement Committee will stay on a Wednesday at 10 o'clock. Its functions stay the same, but as members will be aware, it has lost the neighbourhoods element of its business. So as such, it's proposed that the functions of Executive Scrutiny, which in this proposal it's proposed that Executive Scrutiny is disbanded, the call-in features and the cross-cutting corporate features will now sit with Resources Scrutiny and Improvement, and as such you will notice that there are 15 members proposed for that committee as opposed to 13 in the other 3. Finally, Regeneration Scrutiny simply becomes Economic Growth Scrutiny and Improvement Committee to align that with the title for the Director, Mark Ladyman. Executive Scrutiny has been disbanded in these proposals because we believe, and certainly a number of members have expressed this to myself and others, that it can occasionally duplicate the work of the other Scrutiny and Improvement Committees. And as such, we think that having 4 scrutiny committees across the Council, which scrutinise effectively the 4 directors of the Council, and also the Cabinet members who sit within those directorates, is the best way forward. In short, the proposal keeps 4 scrutinies, but aligns the arrangements to the directorates to enable more effective scrutiny, which has gone on for the last 2 years. Certainly, it's been a help to me as a Cabinet member to hear the members' views around reports before Cabinet. And so we're proposing what is on page 137 of your Cabinet book and page 13 of your Council Minute book, that we recommend to Borough Council that these arrangements are passed. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder for that motion?
I won't say anything now, but I might come in later. Okay.
Thank you. On to questions for Councillor Nightingale.
Thank you, Madam
Sorry.
Mayor. Can I just say, I just want to say 3 things really. One is that I would actually have reservations about the format of the departmental structure, but I think that's something where any anomalies might come out in the scrutiny arrangements anyway, so I think we can live with that. The second point is I do welcome the abolition of the Executive Scrutiny Committee. I think it was superfluous and it was a rather time-consuming exercise, quite often in duplicating work that had already been done in other committees. So that is a welcome development. Thirdly, I think I would have preferred to see the call-in arrangements spread throughout the 4 new scrutiny committees, but I understand that this is not something that the Constitution would allow at the moment, so I will resist from putting in an amendment to that, Madam Mayor. However, in conclusion, I obviously regret that the governance arrangements didn't actually come out with a proposal to go back to some kind of modernised committee system that we've had in the past. But I recognise the reality of the world that we live in in the council, and I think it is particularly important that the scrutiny arrangements should actually mirror the departmental arrangements that the council has set up, so that there is accountability and responsibility enshrined in the arrangements of the scrutiny arrangements that can be probing into what is actually happening at the council. I just want to say this as well, perhaps in response to what has actually happened in the last couple of years. I do welcome the change in the climate in scrutiny committees that is taking place. I particularly think it's useful that we do have cabinet members there making a contribution. As they are a minority administration, I think it is important that they should be there to be scrutinised effectively. And I think there is some positive elements in this that we can use for the future. So, Madam, as far as I'm concerned, I support these arrangements. I think we should get on with the job, and in spite of the reservations that I've just mentioned, I think we should put this to the vote and get the support of the council for it.
Thank you, Councillor Nightingale. Councillor Ovens.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just a couple of things again. I understand the realignment with the departments, but I have concerns that whereas the People Services remit was huge previously, it was going to be a huge one for adults and communities taking in the health programme as well. And secondly, some concerns that we previously kind of amalgamated the children's and adults social service, so that we had that seamless transition for young people, especially with those with special needs, moving from the children's services to adult services. And I hope that there is an overarching view of this, and the arrangements that have been put in place in the past continue smoothly, and that we have a chance to scrutinise those at some point. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Evans. Councillor Foggo.
I'd like to put forward a tidy up of the Constitution, in that at present the Constitution says that the Executive Scrutiny Board is responsible for strategic oversight and direction of the scrutiny function of the Council and of the Directorate Scrutiny and Improvement Committees. In its discretion, it will exercise the scrutiny function in relation to borough-wide issues. And later on in the roles part, it says oversight of the work of the Directorate Scrutiny and Improvement Committees. At present, each Scrutiny and Improvement Committee, the chair goes to the Cabinet meeting and obviously Council and presents any issues. The amendment to the committees as they stand, it seems to me that the oversight of Directorate Scrutiny Committees by Executive Scrutiny Board, now called Resources Committee, is redundant, and therefore I would propose that all Scrutiny and Improvement Committees have equal standing in the Constitution, with chairs presenting their own committee issues to Cabinet and Council, and remove this responsibility from the Executive Scrutiny Board. The call-in procedure remaining with Resources, and basically this brings things into line with how the system actually works at the moment. All it's doing is removing the paperwork that says Executive Scrutiny Board has an oversight of the rest of the scrutiny committees.
Thank you, Councillor Foggo. Councillor Lanigan.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I also had concerns of this, which I actually brought up at executive scrutiny, and I do understand that management changes that we had it appeared to be have done rather quickly, and we only had 3 weeks ago the AGM, where this could have perhaps been sorted then. I am concerned about adult and children's services because I think it's an integral part of what we actually look at. And along with Councillor Evans there, I am hoping that this is going to work well. However, the scrutiny committees will have a look at that and the structure that we've got and put in place. I don't agree with Councillor Nightingale about executive scrutiny. I thought it had an excellent role to play and I thought it worked extremely well. Given that this is now being disbanded, I would like to thank the Chair and the Vice Chair of Executive Scrutiny for the absolutely massive amount of work that they did. So Councillor Thompson and Councillor Davis need to be thanked for all the work that they've done in this committee. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
I've mentioned that, and I do associate myself with those kind words for the Chairman and Vice Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Lanigan. Councillor Kay.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yes, well, I may as well also praise Councillor Thompson and Councillor Davis for all the good work they have done. And although I must admit, even though the work was excellent, I've had my doubts about the use of the Executive Scrutiny Committee. I'll come to that in a minute. You know, we always struggle to improve the system, and we'll never be totally successful. We'll never get a perfect system. However, I must say that I feel that this new structure does fit better with the management of the authority, and certainly the committee that I chaired was to be frank, overburdened with items, and as you all know, it went on for hours and hours, and I often got the blame for not speeding things up, but it was actually, in my view, impossible to speed things up, whilst at the same time allowing people to express their important opinions. I had to smile at Craig's remark about if it is a government, and now I'm saying if it is an administration, if you to draw a parallel. But I think, personally, I believe it is a government and I believe it is an administration. Whether it's in a minority or not is a different matter. I feel in a slightly disappointed. We're so civilised nowadays, aren't we? We're not yarbooing or jeering or trying to score points, and I used to enjoy that. Bring back Wendy Wall is what I say. But on the matter, I'm changing, I'm getting on a bit, and it's difficult when you get older to change your views. Apocryphally it is, perhaps it isn't, I'm not really sure. But years ago, we had cabinet members dominating scrutiny committees, and I walked out, and Councillor Nightingale and I used to cause all kinds of trouble, and there were lots of arguments about the fact that we felt that scrutiny wasn't being given a fair run because the cabinet members were influencing it too greatly. But I must admit, I do feel that has improved a lot. And I think we are now working together in a more balanced way. And I feel that, you know, if you've backed down on the libraries, you know, it's a good example, perhaps, of the public and scrutiny saying, well, is this a very good idea? And getting you to think again. So, yes, bring on the cabinet members, as long as, you know, they don't get too uppity. I have to smile because about whenever 5 years ago it might have been, we decided to have new scrutiny arrangements. And I argued to the death about the naming of the Executive Scrutiny Board, because my contention was it's got a scrutiny function, not an executive function. But it was the flavour of the month at the time, and you all ganged, those of you who were here, all ganged up against me, and I was in a minority of one. But now, isn't it changed? The flavour of the month has changed totally, and you all want to get rid of the Executive Scrutiny Board. So those are just a few little observations, and I hope the new system works successfully until in another 5 years, no doubt, we'll say what a load of rubbish it was and we'll change it all again.
Thank you, Councillor Kay. Councillor Mason.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. Yes, not a lot to add really, except to say that clearly, obviously, it's hugely important that a scrutiny, the format of the scrutiny boards is reflective and mirrors the structure of the Council's directorate. We may not agree with the directorate, we may not agree with certain aspects of it, with certain departments being in different directorates, but as Councillor Nightingale said, that is something that may very well be ironed out through the scrutiny process itself. I would, however, like to ask the Cabinet member if as is implied in the third paragraph, the Resources Scrutiny and Improvement Committee is to actually undertake a combative role in its scrutiny and call-in functions, or whether or not that is the misspelling of the word dual. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Mason. Would you like to sum up, Councillor Massey?
Yeah, you're not the first person to spot that, Josh. But thank you for both Councillor Mason and Councillor Nightingale and Councillor Kay's positive comments about how the structure of our scrutiny committee should mirror the departmental structures. That was welcomed. I think that Councillor Ovens had the point which she raised kind of in part at the Executive Scrutiny Board. I think that what we need to be aware of here, and this goes to answer some of Councillor Foggle's point as well, is that what we're looking to do is to update our constitution to reflect that change in our structure, departmental, in our departments. But in reality, the operation of the scrutiny boards and indeed the chairmanship of those boards will continue to be in the hands of the opposition, noting the fact that we are a minority administration. So the agendas, what you discuss and how you pick things that might be cross-cutting is entirely down to you and will always remain that way in this administration. Councillor Lanigan mentioned the timing of this, and I do recognise some of those points. I think Corporate Services Scrutiny Committee, for sure, there was a reference from some members saying that this was done too quickly and some members saying it had been done too slowly, and it's a very difficult balance to strike in the sense that these changes to our directorates only came in March, and therefore we have to get this through governance, executive scrutiny and full council, and to hit that timetable was next to impossible by the AGM, hence it had to come at the meeting after. I think the last thing I'd say to sum up is that this is the high level written down legal way that we update our constitution, but the operation of those boards themselves will continue to be in your hands effectively, and we're not seeking to trample on that or interfere with it in any way. So any of those issues that you've got that are potentially cross-directorate cutting, that's a matter for yourselves. If you're a scrutiny chair after the end of the meeting and you want to bring that to your scrutiny, that's entirely up to you, and our cabinet members will attend as appropriate. So I move the report, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Massey. Can we go to the vote, please? All those in favour? Thank you. Item Agenda 8, reports from portfolio holders, just one this month, and it's Councillor Craig Hannaway, the Cabinet Member for Children.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So this is the annual report for Children's Services. And first of all, I apologise for the lateness of the report. Members will have read the email explaining that. If any members feel that they haven't had time to read it, I'm quite happy to do a further question and answer session later on, perhaps on another occasion, or of course they can write to me with questions as well. So this sets out what's been happening in the last year. There's never a dull moment in children's services. The challenges that we've had and our achievements in what is a very big range of council services in one department. It shows how we fulfil our statutory duties, how we work with partners in order to improve the lives of children and young people. In the introduction, it mentions, I think we made a very good move this year in that we now have a single corporate director, Barbara Shaw, for Children's Services. I think that was a very good move in terms of keeping the whole thing together and in terms of her managing it. I'd also like to mention Kellen Hadfield. Do you all know who Kellen Hadfield is? Yeah? Kellen Hadfield is our youth parliament member, our new youth parliament member. And Barbara and I have met him recently. We've discussed his priorities for the year. He's very concerned about mental health of young people, so that's one of the issues that he wants to pursue. And he's also going to come and watch us on one occasion. So, yes, shall I warn him? Okay. In terms of our foster carers, I've already mentioned in the other report the investment plan, which is an invest to save plan that we've made in terms of recruiting more, and that is working well. And we've changed the allowance scales and we've applied retention payments and paying council tax. And we are really now competing with the independent fostering agencies for the first time, which I think is a real achievement. I really do enjoy sitting on the fostering panel where we approve and we review foster carers. It's a very interesting experience to meet them and to listen to them, listen to their concerns, because that gives me things to take back into the department to discuss. So, for example, we're currently looking at short-term respite fostering, particularly for disabled children, and how that works. And it's quite an interesting experience, actually, sometimes out in the valley in Saltburn to see in the distance children with their foster carers, and to think, I actually helped to put them together. It definitely makes you feel you've done something worthwhile. In terms of our primary school results, you'll all be aware that we've had another set of really excellent, nationally recognised primary school results at Key Stage 2 again. We're in the situation where all of our primary school children are in schools that have been judged good or outstanding by Ofsted. And there really aren't many local authorities that can say that. So well done to the schools, because it really is a fantastic achievement. Also, you'll know that our children have among the highest Key Stage 2 results in the whole country. And that has brought serious bodies like the Education Endowment Foundation coming to try and find out how we did it. They can hardly believe we did it. And of course the answer is about the cooperation of the head teachers and the support that we give them, and it all working together. And we have some really excellent head teachers in our primary schools. Just to mention three, Kinga in Newcommon, and Jason in Grangetown, and Helen in South Bank, just to mention three, people who really know what they're doing with those children. And I've been in the classrooms as well, and I've seen what they do. That brings us on to our secondary school results, of course, which are of increasing concern to members. We've just had our session with the Education Improvement Partnership, and it is a very good thing, and this is something else that doesn't happen in many places, that they actually make themselves accountable to elected members. Clearly there is a lot of work to do there, and members raise their concerns in the session. Personally, I think that the way forward is that they need to think about what the primary schools do well, and they need to carry that into the secondary schools, into Key Stage 3. So now on to the Ofsted report. We still have an ongoing complaint about the Ofsted report, but the report has been published, and so I think it's a good thing that we talk about it. Obviously, the comments in the report, for those who've read it, they are very balanced. We have some very good comments, some excellent comments in the report. Just noting a few, it says the focus and investment in social workers have resulted in social workers feeling valued and supported in Redcar and Cleveland, that they have manageable caseloads. The report says that no children were found to be in situations of unassessed or unmanaged risk of significant harm, that the outcomes for children looked after are good and improving, that the experience and the progress of care leavers are also good, that their advisors know them well and help them develop skills for independence. Alongside that, of course, there are other things that they say that we can improve upon. We were good for 4 weeks, but then we became requires improvement. So, for example, they say, our strategic planning has not been sufficiently comprehensive. And some of the things that they want to improve are actually things that have been brought up in this chamber, which is interesting. So, for example, they say the return interviews for children who've gone missing need to be improved. And I think that was you, Madam Mayor, brought that up. And I think that's a very good thing, because that means that we have a good level of knowledge if Ofsted are confirming the improvements that we need to make. We still have the ongoing complaint, though, about it, and there is one aspect of it that I'd like to bring to the Council's attention. And this is not particularly that we feel we've been treated unfairly by Ofsted. I think that's a slightly separate issue. So the unfairness part of it is that the model that they use, which is called a deficit model, means that they arrive, they tell you where they think your weaknesses are, and then you have those 4 weeks to prove them wrong. And of course, they can bring things up while they're here. But what they did was they brought things up afterwards when we had no chance to actually respond. But life can be unfair. If we don't win out on that one, of course, we'll live with it. But it's another concern that I have about the Ofsted report. There were 4 reasons why we went down from good, and one of them concerned the first contact team. And just to explain it as simply as possible, when the referral comes in, when a referral of a child comes in, there are decisions for the staff to make, decisions for the social workers to make. So the first question is, do you have parental consent? If the answer is yes, then okay, continue. If the answer is no, then there's a further question, which is this serious enough for you to dispense with consent? Now, answering that question is a very fine judgment, and in there lies all of the things that we must do to help them, but also the things that can go wrong if we make a mistake in answering that question. Everything hangs on that question. And so because of that, we've always operated a system where that decision isn't made immediately. There might be some informal investigation. In other words, the social workers use their professional judgment to actually decide, after they've had a look around, whether it's a yes or no. Ofsted require us not to do that, but to make the decision immediately. They say if you're going out and visiting the family, that's an informal assessment. It must be a formal assessment. Can you dispense with consent? Tick yes or tick no. The problem with that, I think, is that it is leading us away from what must be the most important report concerning children's services of recent times, which was the Monroe Review of 2011. All right, I'll just get to the end of this point then, please, Madam Mayor, because I think this is I really need to tell the councillors. Okay, so the Monroe Review, which has affected all sorts of things in children's services, including here, what it says is that the professional judgment of social workers is more important than any system of compliance, any tick-box system that you may use. It says that prescribed timescales for social work assessments should be removed because they distort practice. The underlying principle of timeliness is important, but should be applied to the whole process of helping a child or young person, not just the early stage of assessment. The problem with Ofsted's judgment, in this part of its judgment, is that it sent us entirely in the opposite direction. And so I have to say to you that I think they have thereby increased the risk of making a mistake in that decision. I was going to go on and talk about other aspects, but if you say my time is up, I'll sit down. Thank you.
Not usually first up. Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. Thank you for what is a very comprehensive report. And I think we need to reiterate again a thank you to all of those staff and officers who worked during that Ofsted And with that in mind, I look forward to bringing to Children and Families Scrutiny the milestones for the improvement plan. And I'm sure we will be monitoring and following that, because I don't think I've really caught much sight of what's in place there. But I'm sure that's something that we will follow up on in the future. Moving on to, there's a couple of things, if you don't mind. Page 7, where it refers to the 522, the Regional School Commissioner. I think we might all say, finally, this person is actually there and you are perhaps going to meet. So I know it's taken a lot of getting there. I'm being optimistic. Moving on to page...
Councillor, do you have to point of the order?
Today.
Oh, aren't you the lucky one? Moving on to page 8, improving special provision and looking to see how we can address the needs of all of our young people. We had a presentation just before this full council meeting about what alternatives would be, and I look forward to seeing how those alternative provisions work out, particularly with the rejig of EOTAS and the rebuild of pathways. So again, that's something that I'm sure that will come up to scrutiny. We're racking up the agenda items already. The other one was, sorry if you may indulge me, page 10, it's round about 5.8.2. There are definite areas where there is a problem with the number of places available, and this has such a strong link with the permission to do so much building, new houses, new homes. Now, I'm not sure what we can do to address that, but it rather looks as if in Nunthorpe and Gisborough area, we are not doing enough to provide the school places, either primary, perhaps not so much secondary in Gisborough, I'm not sure, but certainly in Nunthorpe. So I think that's another area we would need to look at. And finally, if I may, on page 18, which is under SEND, I look forward to some clarity on this, and I think funding is always an issue with this. And linked in with a lot of this as well is the where children are needing an EHCP, and I know it's a national problem, but we're really struggling for educational psychologists, and without that, these young people can't get their educational healthcare plans as they need, and they're waiting too long. Now, I realise, I say this is a national problem, but I hope perhaps as a North East Authority might link back to even the Schools Commissioner, that we are looking at some means of addressing this problem. Yes, absolutely, finally. There's another question, well, I'll send you an email about that. I'm pleased to see the health visiting in school nursing services is going to be successful and it's being looked at and perhaps used as a pilot way forward, because I think we were very brave when we made that decision 2 years ago, possibly. So thank you for that. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Evans. I'm not sure if there's picked up questions amongst that, or it's more comments. Would you like to respond, Councillor Hannaway?
Yeah. Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thanks for the things you said at the beginning, Councillor Evans, about thanking people. I didn't have time to do that in my report. But yes, I would particularly like to thank, particularly, as it says in the last page of the report, all the valuable work of the carers out there in the community and the extended families, without whom, what would our budget look like then? You know, they do extremely valuable work in supporting some of our more vulnerable children at times when they need it most. The improvement plan based on the Ofsted report that you mentioned is going to Cabinet EMT on Monday. So that's going through. And I'm happy to say that I'm meeting the Regional Schools Commissioner tomorrow. Hooray! Yes, I hope. So obviously, we have a lot to discuss, because one of the aspects of the fact that the vast majority of our schools are academies means there are decisions that are simply not possible for us to make. And therefore, if it's not in our hands, then we have to ask, you know, Hillsview, St. Peter's, what's your plan? What's your plan for those schools? So that would be an interesting meeting. Alternative provision. Yeah, the whole education system depends on us having successful alternative provision. And not just as a one-way door either, you know, but as a revolving door. And and Lee Brown's just been talking about that, and Linda Halbert in that session. Of course, it's also linked to our SEND provision as well. We're having a root and branch review of the SEND provision, which is very timely because we just don't have enough capacity. And because the special schools are very much at full capacity, we need to have the lower level needs children staying in mainstream school, which means the mainstream schools have to have the capacity, the trained people to actually work with them. So that review is nearing its end, so we'll have the conclusions next month, and then we'll take it from there. But it is a big piece of work, and I think things have to change a lot in regard to SEND provision. Yes, the EHP, I share your frustration about the EHP. It is a national issue. It takes about 26 weeks to get an educational health plan. But again, that's a national problem. I didn't quite get the last thing you said. Can you remember the last issue? No?
About the health visiting and school nursing
yes.
services.
Yes. And of course, that's an interesting situation because now we have an inspection. They have an Ofsted inspection all of their own. I think, oh no, 2 inspections, one through the CQC and one through another route. But yes, I think you're right. It was a brave decision, but it was a good one as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hanaway. Just a reminder, this is questions, and if you can keep them brief, we've got quite a number of people wanting to speak, and if they can relate directly to the matters of the report. So, Councillor Glyn Nightingale.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I better phrase these as questions. Is the Cabinet member aware that, for example, in the case of the 106 for Longbank Farm development, no money was being allocated to secondary education, which one would have thought would have been a necessary concomitant of the development? My second question is probably rather tangential, and I hope you don't think this is pedantic, but I was at the very interesting presentation this lunchtime about behaviour review, and I just wondered whether it wouldn't be possible to have a friendlier name than the pupil referral unit, or PRU. As I say, it's potentially pedantic, this, but it does rather smack of being institutional, and I'm quite sure that the students themselves would welcome a much better way of describing the educational provision that they're going to get. I particularly don't like the word unit in that particular phrase. The third question is, again, in relation to that presentation. What struck me was that there are a considerable number of pupils involved in this, and the leader asked the question about how many are actually involved in these arrangements for the ending of permanent exclusion and so forth. And I wondered what arrangements are actually made when pupils do move from different schools, between different schools and between the pupil referral unit and schools, for the continuity of the curriculum in their education. And I think it would be useful if the Cabinet member were to be able to give us some insight into those questions.
Thank you, Councillor Nightingale. Councillor Hannaway?
Thank you. The low farm development, I wasn't aware of that there wasn't any money allocated for education. Obviously, there will, for secondary education, there will be places, because obviously there's a statutory duty to provide them. How it's done, of course, differs from one place to another. I know in the Saltburn development it was a case of, well, the school is full, but it has a certain proportion of pupils from East Cleveland, so if in the future they go to Freeborough, of course that has implications for parental choice, obviously, so that's something we've got to look at. But the whole link between school places, housing developments, Section 106 money and all of that, I think is something I need to look more into, because it partly lies, outside any area that I've looked in so far. But I think you're right, I need to perhaps know more about that area. PI, the PRU, do you have any suggestions? We can't... unit is, I suppose, a fairly neutral word. As my esteemed comrade next to me said, it's not as bad as gulag. But we'll welcome any suggestions. Yeah, it is a fairly... It's not the greatest title, but we haven't come up with an alternative one so far. The managed move system, in terms of alternative provision, which we do have to really, look at in terms of how it's working. The managed move system, obviously head teachers are quite polite when they come to these gatherings. When I've sat in their offices and talked to them about the managed move system, and they were rather less polite about it. In the worst cases, it did become a bit of a sort of terrible merry-go-round, a sort of misery go-round, with pupils could be on their 4th or 5th school, and the head teachers would be phoned up every week and say, surely it's not my turn again. And of course, it only applied to the older ones anyway. I've forgotten what the cut-off age was, but behaviour, there was an increasing problem with behaviour of younger children that couldn't be addressed in that way because they couldn't be moved from one school to another. What I'd like to look into more is, because there seemed to be a slight tension there between some of the behaviour goes back to primary schools, and yet everything we hear about the primary schools is very positive. So I felt listening to them, there was perhaps something I needed to look further into there. I certainly do believe that looking at what the primary schools do well and taking that wholesale, if necessary, into Key Stage 3 would benefit the schools a lot. But that's not their ethos at the moment. So I think we're going to have a lot of discussions on that.
Thank you. We're clearly well overrunning on the 10 minutes for questions and answers on report, so we've got another 4 speakers to speak, so if we can keep it as brief as possible, please. Councillor Clark.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. Councillor Ovens touched on about sufficiency of school places. In Gisborough, we've been actually hammered, as far as I'm concerned, with overdevelopment of about 1,000 units being given planning permission over the next few years, and there's no doubt, of course, it's going to have some kind of problems for the future for school places. What I can't understand is, for example, we're getting an extension built at the Galley Hills School, which is costing £1.4 million, and I understand that this council had to put £100,000 towards that, and I don't know why. We have developers coming into this borough, to our town of Gisborough as well. Why don't they have to foot the bill for the complete lot? I'm talking about sufficiency places, not just for education and pupils, but, health as well. These are multi-million, if not multi-billion companies coming in. They know what they're doing. They're saying, we're going to build more houses for the benefit of the community. And what benefit is there is a shortage of places of education, which is so high up on our agenda as a local authority for importance. So why is it we are struggling to give people, hopefully, places where they want their children to go to in their own local schools? Gisborough, as I've said, we're going to get hammered in the next few years, I'm sure. and this local authority, I know there's officers working at it now looking at the problem, but I can't understand why that problem isn't being addressed right now from day one and using developers' money. It sounds simple, I know, and Section 106 agreement, which was talked about, I have little or no knowledge of this, because as a ward councillor, of course, I never get consulted about these problems. I know all about them, but I never get consulted either by the officers of the council or by developers. I've got a lot to say, but there's nobody wanting to listen to me while I'm talking about it. So what I want to know now is, what is this council going to do about the oversubscribed places for certainly the people of Gisborough and for the rest of the borough as well? And I want to know why the developers are not footing the bill for these places. We should be getting hold of these people and saying, you'll foot the bill, you're going to build the extensions, and I don't even care if they bring porta cabins in, but they foot the bill for that, foot the bill for the teachers and the support staff as well. That's what I'd like to know. Thank you.
Councillor Hannaway.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Right, in terms, obviously there have to be places, because it would be against the law for us not to provide places. On the subject of housing development, obviously that's not my area of expertise at all. I can't speak for the administration on housing. I can say personally, I would like to squeeze every penny that we can possibly get from developers to put to use in education, especially in the times of austerity we live in. Any money we can get to put towards the education of our children is very important. And I say I don't fully understand why that always doesn't happen. I have to refer you to someone else to answer that one. But in principle, yes, I mean, I think that's important. But there will have to be the places for the children, because, you know, we can't not provide them.
Thank you. We've got 3 speakers left, and we're already sort of 20 minutes over on the timing of this. So the last speaker will be Councillor Ian Jeffrey, but before that, there's Councillor Watts and Councillor Thompson. So Councillor Watts, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd like to thank Councillor Hannaway on his report yet again. Your reports are always a sort of little ray of sunshine on a rainy day. But, as you'll be aware, in the past, I have challenged you on many issues on the formal and financial issues underneath that nice little top. You mentioned the MAP meeting, you've been to your first. I think this may actually reflect, I know when you came to the council, you admitted you were relatively inexperienced on these issues, and you have taken advice, you've grown, you've been on a learning curve. Now, I worked, as is known, 30 years from a social worker, finishing up in a private capacity in courts doing public and private law for children. So I've seen the whole gambit. I've also seen the problems of...
Can I just ask, is there a question? We're 20 minutes running over, and it's questions and answers rather than comments, or could you ask
Well,
any
I was
question,
leading
please?
to a question. I will speed it up, that I think that you have to tackle the problems and risks as well as basking in what everything's right. You mention the Ofsted report, which says requires improvement. Now that is a serious downgrade because we were good before. The fact that you say you're concerned, and it lists, you know, what you're concerned about, you've put an appeal in, I think shows a lack of judgment. I think you should take this criticism as an informative, something to work to look into. To cut it short, I personally know a lot of the reasons why they're sitting on this initial assessment, and there are ways of doing that assessment. It's been brought out after a lot of child deaths, child injuries. It is important. And I would rather that you, as I say, start inquiring, what do we need to do? How can we do that? Not just saying, well, that isn't fair and we shouldn't be doing that. I think you need to learn a bit more before you start going for the appeal process.
Councillor Hannaway?
Yes. Was that a question?
I'm not sure.
Okay. Thank you for your comments. So, in terms of my conclusion on that particular point of the judgment, yeah, I mean, I'm willing to learn all the time, but that's not just my judgment. It's also the judgment of the head of safeguarding and of the Director of Children's Services, and also more widely of Professor Eileen Munro, whose report is, you know, one of the most significant ever written, the Munro Review. And so all I really have to do is look, because you say, how can we do that? Now, they've been very clear how we must do it. So are you effectively saying how we work around it? Because, of course, that's a different question. And there are other authorities who do it the same way that we have done, who have had reports where they've had a lot of issues, so that one wasn't noticed. So they've been left to carry on to do their first contact team in the same way. But ours, we had fewer issues, and it was noticed. And so I think if after listening to these very senior officers and also reading that, I don't feel it would be, I think I'd be failing in my duty not to tell the council that this is a risk, because I really believe it is. Now, of course, I can be wrong. Anybody can be wrong. I could be wrong. But that's what I believe, and that's why I felt I had to say it. And it's not just a belief based on nothing. It's based on the things that I've told you.
Thank you. Two more speakers, if we can please be brief. Councillor Philip Thompson, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Some questions. Very good report, thick, full of detail. Secondary performance in schools. 40% is the best we can achieve in performance of good. Not good enough, is it? So, what are we going to do? We hold out the carrot. Coming to Redcar and Cleveland, it's a borough for growth. We're going to build you wonderful 4, 5-bedroomed houses. We've got the best tourism Jurassic map in the world. But we can't educate our children. Don't come. So, what are we going to do? We have said in the past, secondary school attainment has been poor because of feeder school quality. Now we're told that we've got to learn from primary schools, or we will think about learning from primary schools. So I hear hesitation. I don't hear enough progress. What are we going to ask the schools commissioner when he comes tomorrow? What is on our list of requests? What are we going to talk about to the combined authority in saying, what resources can you put available to us as an authority to help in making the provision for all the gaps that we list as being existent in our educational provision in terms of staff? We've had a very accommodating meeting before lunch or after lunch with the EIP representatives. We applaud their work, but they're not succeeding. When they came to see us 2 years ago, they were going to make a 10% improvement. They have failed. I'm not saying they have failed because they haven't tried, but we're not succeeding. So collectively, we need to do more. So I'm suggesting that we have not a meeting in 6 months' time. In 6 months' time, 6 months of secondary school have passed, and we won't have achieved anything for the pupils at school. So let us, Madam Mayor, think positively. What are we going to do collectively? And how are we going to speed up this agenda of aspiration? And finally, my question is on school funding. We are saying that schools are underfunded. The current formula will make secondary education provision worse. Therefore, we need to address that as well. What are we doing as an authority to give the detail that demonstrates that this funding is inadequate? We on this side of the House chamber will, I'm sure, work as a cross-party group to lobby where we can. We've heard mention of 2 new elected members of Parliament. I'm sure the one who represents the south part of this borough will work very hard. So together we've got to do much more than we are doing instead of sitting here talking about what we might do.
Thank you. I think there was a lot of questions there. I'm not sure we'll have time to answer them all. We're already about 30 minutes overrunning on this section, but Councillor Hannaway.
Thank you. Thank you for that passionate speech. I think the crucial word is the word we, because obviously the academy programme was specifically designed to remove local authority control of schools. Now, so we have to have a balance, because we have to challenge the EIP. We also have to work with them. And getting that relationship right is very important. You're right, it is not good enough. The 40% of schools, the fact that it's at that level, I mean, in a sense, that is the chickens coming home to roost, because the situation isn't actually worse than it was last year, but we finally had the Ofsted judgments. And of course, the academies had 3 years grace when they became academies. Now, I don't know how you feel about that, but to me, that seems to have been a tremendous mistake, because very few of the forced academies, as distinct from the voluntary ones who were already doing well and then became academies, the ones who were forced to become academies because of their results were then given 3 years without inspection, and very, very few of them have improved their Ofsted result. So we are, first of all, I think, battling a bad system that schooling has been set up in this way. Obviously, when you say we must do something, we will do, of course, everything we can. I don't know if you saw, there was a recent letter from the head in Saltburn in terms of funding, who said in his letter to parents, we continue to do more and more with less and less. So funding clearly is an issue. And of course, it's all very well throwing out a public amount and saying, we have protected this budget. But if alongside it, the national insurance payments are going up and the school maintenance payments are going up, because they have to do that themselves now, in real terms, it is a cut. So in terms of us demonstrating that the schools need more money, I don't really feel we need to demonstrate that, because it should be surely obvious that they are struggling. If they say they're struggling, if all the schools in Gisborough get together and write to all the parents to say, we are struggling, if the head teacher in Saltburn says we are struggling, I don't think we need much more evidence that they are struggling, and that therefore the level of funding needs to be raised. But you are right that the situation isn't good enough, and you're right that the disadvantage gap has not moved. And I think that if we're going to start saying they've failed, I think that, which I think is possibly too early to say that yet, but I think that's the biggest area, because there are other measures that have improved, but that one is very stubborn. But of course that then depends upon factors outside the school. I noticed in that meeting parents were mentioned quite late. I would have quite liked them to be mentioned earlier, because I think working with parents is absolutely vital. Thank you.
Final speaker, Councillor Ian Jeffrey, please.
Thanks, Chair. This is obviously your first meeting as Mayor, and you've obviously twigged that 10 minutes is insufficient time, and that the sterile environment of question and answer just frustrates members even more. And I think, as Philip Thompson articulated, we need more debate about the issues raised in lead members' reports. So perhaps you, in your position, could use your influence to bring about some change in that particular direction. And then perhaps people wouldn't speak at length when they're trying to get a lot of stuff in, like what I'm not going to do. What I want to comment on is the section in Craig's report about unaccompanied asylum-seeking children. I just wonder, well, I think most of us could accept that that's probably the most disadvantaged group, certainly in this borough area, if not across the whole of the UK. And it's not impossible that the numbers might actually go down as a consequence of the government's attitude to these issues. I mean, I don't know if anyone got the opportunity to catch Channel 4 News on Tuesday night, where Amber Rudd, who some tell me is the next Prime Minister of this country, God help us, but where Amber Rudd made at least 2 points. One was that we're not going to take any more children because it encourages trafficking, without producing any evidence to support that view. And also she made the point that local authorities weren't prepared to take any children. Well, again, that isn't true. Local authorities are prepared to take unaccompanied asylum-seeking children as long as the government supplies the resource to enable them to do that. And further in the report, it made the point that of the 80,000 or so children that are accompanied in Europe seeking asylum, many are now starting to drift back to Calais, to the camp that was closed down some months ago, after incidentally this government, or the past government, put £1 million into security measures as opposed to actually addressing the fundamental issue itself. And to date, this country's only taken in something like 400 unaccompanied asylum-seeking children. No more are to be admitted, despite the fact there was an obligation on the government through the Dubs amendment, Alf Dubs, the Labour peer, to increase that number to 3,000. We're certainly not going to reach that figure. So when people point out in the wake of the Grenfell Tower disaster, the Prime Minister has found a new sense of empathy, it clearly isn't the position as far as this particular issue is concerned. I'm conscious that's not a question, Chair. I just request the lead member to endorse my sentiments.
In the interest of fairness, I have sort of mentioned other people. Where's the question? So I was just about to jump in there. Councillor Hanaway.
Yes, thank you for that. I'm not surprised to hear that the children are drifting back to the camps. I remember sitting with you in that meeting the LGA arranged, where there was a civil servant on conference call who sounded completely and utterly without a plan of any kind. She sounded a bit like a guide leader who had a difficult trip to arrange. And there was clearly no plan at all. And she said in the conference call, oh, well, this will be over in a month. I think that was about 8 months ago, wasn't it? And I remember looking at Emmett, who was himself a Syrian refugee, who came across on the boats from Turkey to Greece, walked across 22 countries, and finally got here, and now works with refugees in Hartlepool Council. And I remember looking at him and saying, do you think it'll be over in a month? And he just shook his head. And of course, what she meant was not the situation will be over in a month, but we will stop taking children in a month. Now, with hindsight, I can see that's what she meant. Is there anything else for me to add? I endorse what you said.
Thank you. Okay, on to the next item, agenda 9, consider motions. No motions have been received. So item agenda 10 is to appoint members where vacancies or changes in appointment. First one is Tees Valley Combined Authority Independent Remuneration Panel, that Mr. Simonson to replace Mr. M. Sedlacek. Is everyone in agreement? No? Yes? Thank you. Changes to scrutiny improvement committees have been circulated. Can everybody agree to them? Yeah. And we move on to appointing chairs and vice chairs to the scrutiny and improvement committees. Could I please have nominations for the chair of Children's and Families, please? Do we have any nominations? Oh, has it been circulated? No. So this is for the chairs and vice chairs. Do we have any nominations for children and families?
Yes,
Councillor
Madam Mayor.
Lanigan.
I thought I didn't know whether we were moving this.
Are we moving
as block?
No, we're doing individual.
Right. Children and Families Chair, I nominate Councillor Kay as the Chair.
Okay, is that seconded? Thank you, Councillor Mason. And could we have a show of hands on that nomination, please? All those for? Oh, it's uncontested, sorry. That's Councillor Kay is appointed Chair. Could I have nominations for the Vice Chair of Children and Families, please?
Mary Ovens.
Is that seconded? Councillor Lanigan seconded. Is any other nominations? Oh, that's carried. Mary Ovens, Vice Chair. Could I have nominations for Chair of Adult and Communities, please? Thank you. Is that seconded? Councillor Lanigan. And any other nominations? No, thank you. So that's Councillor Graham Jeffrey, Chair of Adult and... Can I have nominations for Vice Chair of Adults and Communities, please? Thank you. Is that seconded? Councillor Mason. Any other nominations? Oh, thank you. So that's Councillor Ann Watts. Can I have nominations for the Chair of Economic Growth, please? Thank you. Is that seconded? Councillor Mason. And any other nominations? No, thank you. So that's Councillor Hunt is Chair of Economic Growth. Nominations for Vice Chair of Economic Growth, please. Thank you. Is that seconded? Councillor Lanigan, Councillor Thompson. And any other nominations? No, thank you. So that's Councillor Laura Benson, Vice Chair of Economic Growth. Could I please have nominations for Chair of Resources, the Scrutiny and Improvement Committee?
Nightingale.
Thank you. Is that seconded? Mary Lanigan, sorry, Councillor Lanigan. And any other nominations? No, so that's Councillor Nightingale is Chair of Resources. Can I have nominations for Vice Chair of Resources, please?
Councillor Steve Turner.
Thank you. And is that seconded? Councillor Lanigan. Are there any other nominations? No, uncontested. So Vice Chair is Councillor Steve Turner. Thank you. Amendment on 211. So we're on to reply to questions from members of the council, which notice has been given. Just a reminder that 2 minutes to ask the question and the cabinet members allowed 5 minutes to respond. So our first question is from Councillor Turner to Councillor Quigley.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just before I ask Councillor Quigley the question, can I first thank Councillor Quartermain for the part he's played in this role over the last 2 years. Certainly from the outside looking in, he has been one of the most efficient and effective cabinet members that I can say I've seen in the last 2 years of this administration. Councillor Quigley, big shoes to fill. So, with that in mind, can you quantify for me, please, the costs versus the return on investment to this authority for the excellently organised recent events, such as Kick Off the Summer, East Cleveland Klondike and the Snow White Pantomime? Could he also confirm what costs, if any, the authority has in relation to the fabulous exhibitions at Kirkleaden Museum and the Palace Hub? Thank you.
Councillor Quigley.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and I'll echo your compliments regarding Councillor Quartermain in his role that he's played in the portfolio in the past few years, and as you say, big shoes to fill. With regards to the specific events and exhibitions outlined in your question, the The Snow White pantomime at Tuned In. This event brought in 800 people over its duration of 5 nights and brought in an income of £1,700 to the council from ticket sales. And I also understand that they've had subsequent bookings as an outcome of that. East Cleveland Klondike. This excellent event was organised by the East Cleveland Villagers Big Local and funded by them. However, the council did support with officer time and paid for some of the ancillary costs in relation to with regards to communications. This event brought in over 4,200 visitors, which was an increase of 131% on the same Sunday of the previous year. The excellent Kick of the Summer event cost £14,312 for the 4 days of activity, and that included children's entertainment, the Continental Market, the promotion and communications, and over the course of that bank holiday weekend, 77,000 people visited, and we're currently undertaking evaluation of the events that took place and all the activity around that, and we will have results relating to that by the end of this month. With regards to exhibitions at Kirkleatham Museum and the Palace Hub, the Lego exhibition that was held last year cost £10,000 for its 7-week duration and brought in 23,000 paying visitors. The Robots exhibition, which is currently underway, £29,000 for 12 weeks and has so far brought in 1,200 visitors in its first 2 weekends. And most recently, the Only in England exhibition, which has cost us £5,000. This nationally recognised exhibition will be on display until October. I don't have any specific visitor numbers for that attraction just yet. I hope that answers your question.
Do you have a supplementary, Councillor Turner?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you for that, Councillor Quigley. Excellent answer. The only one you failed to answer was the first one, as to what you thought the uplift in visitor numbers were on your first answer. Like we said, you have got big shoes to fill. I'm sure I was as shocked as everybody else was when Councillor Quatermain was unceremoniously dumped from the cabinet of this authority. With that in mind, can you tell me what ideas you have yourself to carry on the excellent work that Councillor Quatermain started over the last 2 years?
Councillor Quigley.
Thank you for that relatively passive-aggressive second question. Unfortunately, that's democracy sometimes. I will obviously carry on the excellent work that Carl started in his first 2 years, and that will continue in terms of the thinking place. I don't know if you attended any of the exhibition, if any of the workshops for that. We've got the culture strategy that needs to be developed over the course of the next few months. We've got the excellent Festival of Thrift that will be again coming to the borough. So there's events that are already in the pipeline that we need to continue to support in our communities, such as another Klondike event if the East Cleveland Villagers Big Local want to go ahead with that, improve that for next year, perhaps even getting the tour to Yorkshire, having that as a beginning stage, which will be an excellent event if we can secure that for the borough. So I hope we have some more larger national events that will be recognised, and I hope that Councillor Turner will support these going forward.
Thank you. On to question 2, Councillor Turner to Councillor Norton.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Councillor Norton, looking very comfortable in your new cabinet seat, not subdued in any way. Can I ask, Councillor Norton, can you confirm if you have any plans to spend your time turning the screw on the owners of the numerous empty retail units that currently sit rotting along the middle of our town centre? Also, with increased visitor numbers to the seafront, can you confirm that you have a viable plan to rejuvenate the economic growth of our high street in the same way? Thank you.
Councillor Norton.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Can I just confirm with Councillor Turner, to avoid any doubt, we are talking about Redcar High Street? Good, because that's what I've gathered most of my information on. But nonetheless, I want to assure members that in talking about Redcar High Street today, I don't preclude those other high streets that struggle in Eston, Delton, Broughton and other places. Well, I think you can go down every high street Let me then sort of turn to the vacant units on the High Street. For those of us, Madam Mayor, that are old enough to remember, for the High Street, read memory lane. No longer have we got Athena, Tandy, Woolworths, Radio Rentals, all gone. I read a report by David Jinks, who is Head of Consumer Research at Parcello Hero. He tells us that the High Street will be unrecognisable by 2030. Probably I will as well, I'll be 80. But he talks with conviction and authority on that subject. He tells us that supermarkets will become an endangered species. The rise of online grocery shopping, including internet services, such as Amazon Dash Replenishment, will enable your e-fridge to order your groceries without even lifting a finger. And that will kill the weekly shop. Superstores, he says, will become white elephants, inconvenience stores. That by 2030, some 40% of retail sales will be online. It's not all doom and gloom, though. We need to continue the development of the High Street that has already seen the arrival of new clothes shops, boutiques and 2 national chains in Subway and Costa. Those responsible for regeneration, says David Jinks, are urged to look back to the future where our town centres could return to the Victorian model that was once a mix of shops, houses and other businesses. There is a need to keep building on the excellent work by Coton Ward councillors Carl Quatermain and Neil Baldwin. The development of a microeconomy in the town centre, where they have encouraged and supported new businesses such as micropubs and wine bars. This initial transformation of the town centre into a community that has an extended economy outside of normal shopping hours, to include housing, arts, entertainment, offices, manufacturing and leisure, as well as shops, needs to continue. We need a vibrant high street embracing the era of e-commerce. Through mutual commitment and working together, the Council will look to take existing successful business owners and landlords of empty properties along with them on this continuing journey of high street transformation. Turning then to the second part of Councillor Turner's question, and do I have a viable plan to rejuvenate the economic growth of our high street? Well, I personally don't have a plan, Councillor Turner, but the borough does. There stands available £6 million of capital funding, 5 million of which arises from the SSI fund, ready to further regenerate the Redcar town centre. Sadly, it took the demise of a steelworks to produce the bulk of this cash. Local ward councillors, our MP Anna Turley, and officers of this council have, through direct engagement with the high street businesses, residents and other members of the public, consulted on the high street regeneration. A report on the outcome of these consultations is currently in draft form and awaiting wider circulation. The report, which I've read, oozes first-class observations and suggestions by the people that walk up and down that high street. All of which, I'm obviously boring somebody, all of which will be added to the mix that eventually will produce a much revised investment programme for Redcar High Street. I will ensure, Madam Mayor, Councillor Turner, that this plan is given the widest circulation amongst all stakeholders. The plan will be viable and it will promote the rejuvenation of the Redcar High Street.
Do you have a supplementary, Councillor Turner?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. Thanks for that, Councillor Lawton. It's excellent to hear that you've read some reports and your knowledge of the retail sector in the town centre is excellent. This authority's growth strategy, published in June 2016, stated that there was an economic performance gap and we needed to grow the service sector to improve the number of jobs in the professional and business service sectors. With that in mind, can you tell me what work your predecessor has done on this over the last 12 months and what work you intend to be building on? Thank you.
With respect, Madam Mayor, I couldn't answer that question without going into the detail of that document, which I, by the way, I have read, but I'd need to sit down and have a conference with my colleague, Councillor Dale Quigley. But I can assure him he'll get an answer to his question, either in a one-to-one meeting or in an email.
Thank you. That concludes business of the council today. Thank you for your attendance and yeah, thank you.